Regan Slaymaker for Boxing Social in association with Empire Fight Store and R Kings. And I have the pleasure to be joined by esteemed boxing analyst and author of The Knockout, Andy Clarke. Andy, how are you doing?
Oh, good, thanks. How are you?
I'm all good. I mean, all the better. I mean, one of my first interviews for Boxing Social is yourself, so it's great to catch up with you again. I mean, we've got so much to talk about, so and I know I don't want to keep you for too long, but where else to start? I mean, the rematch got the news overnight. Chris Eubank and Conor Benn seem to be rematching on November the 15th. I mean, we'll talk about the first fight in a minute, but is the magic still there from the first fight for you for this rematch?
I think it will be when we get round to it and the promotion starts up. It was quite interesting at Spurs because it was just this mega night where you had this drama playing out behind the scenes with the arrival of Eubank Senior and a decent undercard, a good undercard, a really nice evening. The stadium just gradually filling up. Everything just went perfectly. The ring walks were incredible, and then the fight was great. It was absolutely terrific, tremendous to watch from beginning to end. And at the end of it, I and quite a few other people chatting on the way out did kind of feel like it would be impossible to top that. That it was almost in many ways the perfect night, that it just couldn't have gone any better. And I think it will be very difficult for the rematch to live up to the first fight, but that's not to say that it'll be impossible. And there's definitely an appetite for it. Both fighters want it. They both wanted it straight away again afterwards. It was initially announced for September the 20th, but at the time, people I spoke to did say to me that was very unlikely, that they jumped the gun a bit on that, and that later in the year was more likely because there were things to be sorted out with the negotiations, mainly around the rehydration from Eubank's side. So I don't know what the details on that are. As I understand it, it's going to be 160 again, and he doesn't have a problem with that. What he struggled with was the rehydration. So it'll be interesting to see if that's been removed, because I don't think from conversations I had, I found it hard to believe that he would take the fight without that, without the rehydration clause being removed. So it's good to see it get over the line because we've been expecting it to happen. And it was a really good night. It was a tremendous night, a brilliant fight. And I think it's one that obviously Eubank will feel confident that he will win again, particularly if the circumstances are more in his favour, or he would feel them to be, if he doesn't have to look after himself overnight and can just do what he wants when he's weighed in. But certainly Benn will feel that he'll be much better the second time around. So he'll be very confident of winning too. So they both wanted it. People do want to see it, and it's good that it's happening.
It definitely is. I for one are just as excited. I mean, I don't. The only annoying thing is we don't get that he's here moment of senior again. But it'd be interesting to put to you. Who do you think like the rematch kind of favors? A lot of people are saying that Conor Benn is this fresh the younger, fresher fighter going into this, but there's also the other side of things where Eubank's beaten him before, and it was fairly conclusive on the scorecards at least as well, with him winning those last two rounds quite comfortably. Who do you see the rematch favoring more?
It does depend quite a lot on what the terms and conditions are. If there is no rehydration, then I think Eubank will feel that that was what really hampered him in the first fight. Because I was at the weigh in the morning, and I thought he looked okay. People don't look brilliant when they've had to work hard to lose weight, so you could tell that he'd had to work hard, and he'd have got that extra half a pound off if they got there sooner, because they got their timing slightly wrong. I think they thought they had 2 hours after Bennett got off the scales, and if it had been for an international title, then they would have had, but there was no title. It was the British Boxing Board of Control, and with them you get an hour. So they arrived, realised that, and it was all a bit of a panic and a rush. But he looked okay, I thought. He looked worse, I thought, when I saw him at the ceremonial weigh-in about 6 or 7 hours later,
Okay.
because you're having to be careful. You can't put on too much. You have to decide, how are you going to do it? Are you going to try and take it all off however much you go over? Or are you going to allow yourself to go over and then take it off the next morning before the second weigh in? Or are you just going to try and keep track of it and not go over that cusp and do it that way. There's a couple of ways you can go about it. So I think he'll feel that if that clause is gone and he just has to make 160 and then after that he can do what he wants, I think he'll feel that that'll make him a lot stronger. But Ben will definitely feel that he's going to be a lot better in the second fight than he was in the first. And it's hard to argue with that because I don't feel like they'll try and make him any bigger. He weighed in at 156. And I thought he looked in good condition. They brought him down from 165 because they just wanted to kind of keep in with that ritual that you go through in fight week, because I think it would be slightly odd if you didn't subject yourself to a bit of hardship and a bit of dieting fight week and that kind of thing. You're just used to it. But I don't feel like they'll feel that they need to put any more pounds on him. They'll just feel like he'll know what he's getting himself into now, and he'll be able to pace it a little bit better and just plot his way through the rounds a little bit better. So there's pretty strong arguments actually you can make on either side.
Definitely as well. Do you think around the weight and things like that? Do you think, or where we're at weigh-ins all the time? Do you think obviously where this was such a massive commercial event, more eyes were on boxing, I think that week than any. I don't want to say any other fight night. We love every fight night, but it was a massive occasion. It bled into the mainstream. Do you think the issues with weight kind of and the weight making people hadn't seen it before, so it was kind of brought up even more so that week?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And he didn't do himself any favours, Eubank, by releasing that footage. And he would have known that that was going to get him into trouble with the board. But by that point, he'd been fined so much already. What did it really matter? But it wasn't. It wasn't. You know, it was a. He wanted people to know. Basically, he wanted people to know, or he wanted people to think, maybe Team Ben, that it was a lot worse than it actually was. There was a plan behind him releasing that footage. Eubank doesn't do anything on a whim. Everything is calculated, and he would have known what he was potentially getting himself into. But people did talk about weight a lot that week, and I did find it slightly odd because people were talking about it, including some quite experienced people too, like they'd never seen someone not look great at a weigh-in before. And you just think every fighter, if they're in the right weight division, has to work hard to make weight. That's what this is. You never want them to look terrible, obviously, but he didn't look terrible. I stood next to him basically, and he looked like, as I said, he looked how somebody looks when they're having to work hard to make weight. But because they got there a bit late and then they kind of ran out of time and he did actually miss the weight, then of course people are going to think, oh, he's really struggling. But I knew that it wasn't the case, that he was bone dry and there was just nothing left. If he'd had longer, he'd have been able to do it. If they got their timing, better, then he'd have been able to do it. But there was a lot of talk around it. And boxing's dangerous. We all know that. Dehydration is dangerous. And you have to do these things correctly. But it was the same for both of them because Ben was stepping up from really 154. He could probably still do welterweight, and a weight you can make safely is you can argue that's the weight you are, but his previous couple of fights have been 154. But he's stepping up against someone who's naturally a lot bigger than him, so that's dangerous. But the British Boxing Board of Control were there on site. They had a very close look at everything, and they were happy. And they are a responsible outfit. So I think some of the stuff that people were coming out with, it did make me kind of think to myself, are you serious? It's like, honestly, the way you're carrying on, like we're all concerned about safety, but we all know what this sport is. So I think maybe second time around, if there's no rehydration and they just both have to make 160 pounds, and then we can all move on and forget about that side of it, then yeah, I don't think it'll be quite such a big talking point.
Definitely, I think I agree with you. A lot of people were kind of very much leaning towards a Eubank opinion around that fight. I do want to move on to next weekend. I mean, it's mad how quickly this is fight. Moses Itauma steps up against Dillian Whyte in Riyadh. I mean, what are your initial thoughts on this fight, Andy? Obviously, Dylan's fought at levels that Moses hasn't fought at yet, but Moses is very much making noise. I mean, Turki Al-Sheikh's tweeting that he wants to see him in with Alexander Usyk next. I mean, it's a really kind of I don't want to say strange fight because I feel like the matchmaking is good, but in terms of both people's abilities, it's dividing sometimes people's opinions at points.
It is a little bit. I think it's good matchmaking as well. Moses Itauma has looked absolutely supersonic so far. There's no question about that. And I watched him in the amateurs a reasonable amount. Enrico Itauma, as he was known, European youth champion, world youth champion, was basically stopping everybody in the first round, and you could tell that all the noise around him was justified. And you'd hear the sparring stories, and I heard most of them before they kind of hit the absolute mainstream. You probably did too. And everybody says the same thing, which is this is somebody with a phenomenal amount of natural ability, and the sky is the limit. But there's an awful lot that needs to be done before you realise that kind of potential. And so far, he's done it all. He really has done it all. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be straightforward. And so far, he hasn't really been tested in that no one's really managed to hit him yet. And that will happen at some point. And until that happens, we don't really know how he will cope with it. People around him will say that they do know because they will have seen him in sparring, but sparring's big gloves and head guards. So there are plenty of questions still yet to be answered. And my hope is that Dillian Whyte will ask him a good few of them, and ask him some stern questions. I do feel like Itauma will win the fight, but the way that Dillian Whyte's being dismissed is quite interesting, because I know he didn't exactly look dynamite in his last fight, for example. But as you said, he's been places that Itauma hasn't been, and you can't question his grit. And it will work for him as well that he's being written off. I think it'll get on his nerves. I think it'll wind him up, and he'll get to Riyadh and he'll realise that he's really there to be part of the Itauma show. And that's another thing that Itauma has to handle. Although I think he will, because he's very grounded and level-headed. I've spent a bit of time around him, done a couple of streams with him on and stuff like that. And what does hit you about him is that he's got that rock solid confidence, a real confidence, where he doesn't feel the need to say loads. But it's not because he's shy or hasn't got anything to say. It's just because he feels that he knows boxing inside out, or kind of inside out already, because he's been doing it for such a long time. So I don't think that he's going to come unstuck against Dillian Whyte. But at the same time, if he beats Dillian Whyte, and let's say he beats him in style, then he deserves a lot of credit for it. People shouldn't say, oh, well, Dillian Whyte's this or that, and he's not any good anymore, or all that kind of thing. The reality is he's done what he's done. He's still got some ambition left. And Itauma is still, in heavyweight terms, a kid, isn't he?
Definitely as well. And I think people are forgetting he's only, whilst, like you said, he hasn't, his last couple of performances haven't been dynamite, but he's only lost to world champions.
Yeah.
To Dillian Whyte. You were talking about? That's an interesting point. I've been saying this. We won't know kind of where Moses Itauma is until he's been hit on the chin. Kind of team Itauma probably. I don't know if they would or wouldn't want to see it, but do you think Dillian Whyte will provide that resistance in this fight next weekend?
I hope so. I hope so, because it's great seeing someone perform in the way that Itauma has, but at the same time, it's going to happen at some point. And I'm not saying it's better for it to happen sooner rather than later, because at heavyweight, any punch that catches you right that you don't see can be the end for you. And that's just the reality of the world that they live in. And so you're not going to volunteer for it. You don't want someone to just put their hand up for it just to, well, yeah, go on then, show us if you can take one. That's crazy. But at the same time, it is going to happen at some point. And when you're as good as he is, there's always that chance that it might not really happen until you're in really deep. And then it does happen, and the person you're in with has either put you away, or they're that good that they're not going to let you off the hook. Whereas it can happen in a fight where it causes you a significant problem, but you're able to handle it, and because you're better than the person you're in with, you're then able to go on and win the fight. So I would like to see it. I would like to see it, because punch resistance is a huge, huge thing, and how you react when you're hurt is a massive thing as well. Some fighters seem to know what to do and others don't. I was in Istanbul a few weeks ago watching Jazza Dickens turn in a great display against Albert Batagaziev. But one of the problems that Batagaziev has got, and I've noticed it in previous fights, is that he doesn't know what to do when he gets hurt. He just springs back up to his feet and starts throwing again. And it's that kind of thing that you need to discover, because I find myself thinking about David Price a bit when it comes to Itauma and the way people are putting so much on his shoulders, because that's what happened with David Price. He was a top amateur, an Olympic bronze medalist, and he was smashing everybody to pieces, and he looked absolutely incredible until he didn't. And no one really foresaw that. He was put in with Tony Thompson, and it ended up being a bit too much for him too soon. And he never really recovered from it. I mean, he went on to have a good career afterwards, and he was in some big fights, but he didn't go on to do what people thought at that point he was going to do. So that you do never know. You do never know. I'm a believer when it comes to him, but it's a crazy sport, and one punch can genuinely change absolutely everything. And adversity is heading his way. I don't know how much of it he'll get a week on Saturday, but some is definitely coming, and that's how will he handle it? He will insist that he knows how he'll handle it, but I would argue that even the fighter doesn't really know.
Did
Not
you
for
feel?
absolutely certain.
No, no, no. Definitely, it's one of those sports where it's incredibly honest, and we won't find out until we do. Did you find then, from what you were saying there, kind of the calls for a fight between? I mean, almost that 30 seconds after Usyk knocked out Daniel Dubois the other. Did you find the calls for a fight between Moses Itauma and Alexander Usyk a bit premature then?
Yeah, I did. I really did. And I think there's absolutely no way, I don't think, that Frank Warren would ever want that fight for him at this stage of his career, because he knows how to bring fighters on. He knows how they need to be developed. But we're in this era now, which has been created by Turki Al-Sheikh, where he wants to see he wants to see the best against the best. He wants to see the most enticing matchups. And that's done an awful lot for the sport. And nobody should kind of forget that. We had these cards last year which were stacked full of 50-50s or thereabouts, from the top of the bill down to the bottom, and it was a hell of a year. It really was. But at the same time, it's a slightly dangerous road to go down too, because it can make for short careers. If somebody gets knocked off and then they put themselves, and then they're put in another 50-50 the next time around, and say they lose that one, then that can be then ruined, because their confidence might completely go, their belief might go. And obviously boxing, like all sports, is particularly a mental sport, and ego's huge, and damage to that can just cripple a fighter. So I definitely wouldn't want to see him box Usyk, because I think that's far too much too soon, even for him. I can see why Turki Al-Sheikh wants it, and I can see why loads of boxing fans would be keen on seeing it. But for me, it would not be the right thing to do. Not for him, but Turki Al-Sheikh's not thinking about him. He's thinking about us, isn't he? He's thinking about fans. He's thinking about what would he want to see. But if you're in the Itauma business, and it's not. No one's afraid of anyone. It's not that. It's just, why would you do that now? Why would you go in that deep now? But then again, if the money was stratospheric, then they might have to have a conversation about it and just say, look, we can't. How can we not do this? Because there's no guarantees, are there? You could say, no, it's not the right thing at the moment, but then that kind of windfall never comes your way ever again. So, yeah. I think if Usyk's got one more, I don't think he would want it to be against Itauma. But then the Saudis have said they're not interested in seeing him against Parker, which I found a bit disappointing, actually, because Parker's done really, really well on Riyadh season cards. He's been a star, and he's earned that shot. So we'll wait and see on that score, but not for me, not
No.
with my Itauma kind of hat on, if you like. No, I don't think it would be a great idea.
No, and then I feel like we had that tweet 1 minute, and then we had there's another topic I want to cover, and then we had Jake Paul getting in the ring, having a face off with Usyk, and then about 2 days later, we've got apparently negotiations are being taken seriously between a fight between Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua. I mean, how are you seeing this Jake Paularization of boxing, for want of a better word, of boxing at the moment? He was very present at the fight night. I feel like he was sat almost front row. Um, and it seems like whether it's an exhibition or not, that a fight between either Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua or Alexander Usyk, because he faced off with him, seem, I don't want to say not too far away.
Yeah, it's for me. This whole thing with him is very very simple. Before I get to him as a fighter, though, MVP, I think, are doing really, really good things.
Agree.
That card at Madison Square Garden was really, really good. They're signing loads of British female fighters. I wouldn't be amazed if we see them doing shows over here. It would make sense, wouldn't it? But given the roster that they've got, the way they treat people, from what I'm told, is really good. I know, for example, that Nina Minka, when she was supposed to fight Amanda Serrano, and then it didn't happen because of, I think, some kind of eye problem for Serrano, they paid her in full, which is not what normally happens. And you love to hear about things like that. You really do. So they are an outfit and they're going places. And all I hear about them is good things from fighters, managers, everybody. So that side of it, and he's a marketing genius. Let's not pretend otherwise. You know, he's enormously successful in what he does, and obviously a very switched on, just brilliant operator. Quite honestly, I mean, you can't. How could you describe him in any other way? As for the boxing, he's had one real fight. He's had one real fight, and that was against Tommy Fury. And I give him credit for the performance he put up against Tommy Fury, because at that point he'd been boxing for a handful of years and he was in with somebody who'd been boxing for much, much longer than him. I don't know what level that fight was. You could maybe say it was an area title level fight. But having said that, Fury hadn't really done enough in his pro career up until that point to really justify that tag if you look at who he'd been in with. But you could maybe say that it was an area level fight, and that is a good level. Anyone who, like us, who follows the sport, we love area title fights because they are if you're an area title champion, you know, you are a really good fighter. So that's maybe where you could put that. And the fact that he managed to run Fury as close as he did and put him down and give him a good close fight, I thought was to his credit, because Fury's been boxing much, much longer than him. So that gave us a benchmark as to where he was actually at that point 2 years ago. All the other fights have been against fighters who are either MMA fighters or retired boxers or both or whatever, but they're basically against people who aren't coming to win. They're there for the money, and they might give it a bit of a crack for a while, and then that's it. And yeah, he does look like he's improving, but those kind of fights are like a gym session. It's kind of easy to look good in those fights because you're being allowed to do pretty much what you want to do. So how much better he's got since Fury? I would say he has got better, but it's impossible to know how much better. One thing he definitely isn't is a world level fighter. So when people talk about fights like Joshua and Usyk, the only possible way that they can happen is if they are either an exhibition and promoted as such, or there is an agreement in place, an arrangement in place between the two parties about what is going to happen. And what that would have to stipulate would be Anthony Joshua, Alexander Usyk, you're going to agree that we're going to go this many rounds and you're going to pull your punches and you're not going to hurt him. Because we all know if this was a fight on the level, something really, really bad could happen. That's the only way it can happen. It can't happen as a legitimate contest because the British Boxing Board of Control, for example, would never sanction it. You'll find a commission in America who will, because you just always do over there. But it would be incredibly irresponsible and dangerous to allow that fight. And there can't be anyone in the Jake Paul business, surely, who would want to see him have a legitimate contest against either of those two, because you're just putting him in incredible danger. And look what he did to Francis Ngannou. And Ngannou is an MMA world champion and 0-1 as a fighter, so a novice pro. But against Tyson Fury, and Fury may have thought that was going to be an exhibition or a bit of a cakewalk, but it wasn't. It wasn't. So Ngannou had done an awful lot more as a boxer, proven an awful lot more as a boxer in those 10 rounds than I would say Jake Paul has in his career so far. And look what Joshua did to him. I was ringside for that. And when you see someone stretched out like that, you know in that moment, anything's possible. Somebody could be dying right in front of you. So if he could do that to Ngannou, imagine what he could do to Jake Paul. So the talk around it, I don't know. It's if it somehow ends up happening, people have got to be honest about what it is. You can't try and mislead people and say, no, 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 this is a legit fight. It's a fight on the contest. They're both going to go in with a warrior mindset to win. Because if anybody agrees to that, then people need to be arrested. Quite honestly, it's just as simple as that.
Is it? I completely agree with you, Andy, on that. I think, and the Francis Ngannou point is so valid. Where whilst he wasn't a boxer, he was still a fully fledged heavyweight. I don't think even at that launch press conference, I don't think I've ever seen someone as big as him. Like his head was bigger.
Unbelievable.
His head was bigger than my entire torso. It was incredible.
272 pounds of just pure rock.
But yeah,
Just incredible, incredible guy.
and it's great. But where obviously, and I agree, it should be a exhibition. But with kind of Jake Paul having a legitimate world ranking with the WBA, does that kind of blur the lines a little bit? Like,
What he's so good at, like, and you've got to give him credit for this, is he's amazing at blurring lines, and
yeah,
it's smoke and mirrors and all the rest of it. There's no point in him pursuing his professional boxing career at the actual level that he's at, because aside from Fury, who just so happened to be at roughly the same level and also really well known, so that can work commercially, there's no one else out there for him who he can fight in, like a proper boxer, if you like, who he can fight, because there's just not the rest of that world. They're not good enough. He has got miles ahead of the likes of KSI and people like that. And like I say, he has buckled down to training, and you can see the improvement. And as I said before, for the amount of time that he's been boxing, he's made good progress, and I give him credit for that. But he's incredible at blurring those lines, of kind of managing to get out of that kind of influencer lane and make people believe that actually he's at a level that he's not at, because in boxing you can do that. There's no league where you have to compete against certain people. It's not like track where you have to do the times or you don't qualify to compete at a certain level. If you've got his commercial pull and his savvy, you can put yourself there. And that's what he's done. And it's really, really impressive. But at the same time, the WBA giving him a ranking is absolutely absurd. I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. Off the back of what? Chavez had been retired for 10 years, boxing miles above his natural weight. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And it looked like they might go back on it, didn't it? But in the end, they didn't. It's a strange one all around, because people in the sport will know that if a fight with Usyk or Joshua happens, and it's not kind of made explicit to actually relax, no one's going to get badly hurt here. People on the outside will think that it's a proper fight. They'll think it's a proper fight. And to be honest, I'd still be a bit nervous about the idea of an exhibition, because one just purely instinctive counterpunch from Joshua or Usyk, well timed, no enormous amount of effort, that could be enough.
yeah.
That could be enough to just switch somebody's lights out easily. Easily.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. Final two for me, Andy, and I promise this is back to the quote unquote proper boxing now, and it's to the world title fight that's headlining Windsor Park, Lewis Crocker versus Paddy Donovan, two. I mean, I was there in Belfast, in March. I mean, I don't think I've been a better in a better audience for a fight, and the fight lived up to it as well. But I mean, do you think we see the same performance as we did, minus the controversy at the end? How are you looking forward to this fight?
Oh, I'm really looking forward to it. I watched from home, and it was great. I was really, really enjoying it. I thought Donovan was giving us a sensational performance. I had him winning the fight clearly, and I thought he may well go on and get the stoppage in the later stages. It was very unfortunate that it ended the way that it did, and obviously you're going to be upset if you're Donovan, but at the same time, I didn't feel like there was anything wrong with what Marcus McDonald did. I thought it was a brave decision. I've seen instances in the last few years, we all have, where somebody definitely could, probably you could argue should have been disqualified because they've hit somebody late, and although the opponent has insisted that they're fine to continue, you can see that it's taken too much away from them, or the referee's allowed it to continue when you feel like they should have made the decision that the punch has taken too much away from that person. And a DQ is never what you want to see, but at the same time, I always felt like we would get the rematch, and I'm glad we've got it. And for Donovan, although it would have hurt a lot the way that it finished, I'm sure Andy Lee would have been telling him, listen, outside of that, that was tremendous. You know, that was a breakout performance. You'll look back on this when you're retired and all the rest of it and just think that, strangely enough, like one of the biggest nights of your career was that one, because you really stepped up. And he'll have this burning sense of injustice, which will have been lighting his fire during training camp, will be at the minute. But with Crocker as well, you know, people, he'll be aware that people thought he was lucky in the first time around. It wasn't lucky, you know, it was late. The punch was late. It wasn't lucky on his part. But I felt like he was heading for defeat that night. He was heading for defeat. And I think it's going to take a lot for him to be able to bridge what seemed to me like quite a big gap between the two of them in terms of their pure boxing ability, basically.
Definitely from that, and I'm very aware that we've only got a few minutes left of the Zoom. Do you think? Yeah, I think obviously you're only as good as your last performance. That's the kind of the boxing ring to it. Is that the way you're leaning to another Paddy Donovan kind of? I don't want to say masterclass, but it was looking like that way last night. Do you think that's what we'll see again?
I do, yeah. I feel like we've seen the fight.
Yeah.
I feel like we've seen the fight, and that what we'll get the same thing again,
Mm.
basically.
Perfect. And final one from me, Andy. And I've listened to. I know you're a Terence Crawford fan, but I mean, how are you seeing this fight between Canelo? I mean, coming up to super middleweight, but undisputed at multiple weights, beating Israel Madrimov the way that he did. I mean, yeah, but how are you seeing this one?
I'm fascinated by this one. I'm really looking forward to it. I give him a good chance. I'm not saying he definitely will win, but I think he definitely can. It is a big step up, obviously. I think Canelo is quite one pace these days. I think that explosivity has gone, and it does as you get older and you've had lots of fights and lots of training camps. So that real change of gear where you can put that punch in that maybe the opponent's not really braced for, that ability to really kind of surge, if you like, that snap, however you want to describe it. I don't think that's really there anymore. It could still be the case that at 168 and a very solid 168, he just hits relentlessly and consistently too heavily for Crawford, and that he'll catch him and he won't be able to take it. Like loads of people haven't been able to take it. But I think he's that good, Crawford, that there's a good chance he can. That he's not just going to stand there and tuck up and let Canelo land on him, but he's got that real grit and toughness, Crawford, that you don't see very often, that refusal to lose. I think that's what he's got. So I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be terrific, and I think it's going to live up to the billing.
Definitely. And where the boxing world kind of, I feel like we operate in a vacuum sometimes. I feel like it's a very niche sport. But do you think that fight being on Netflix and off the back of the success of the all-female card, do you think this fight is going to be another perfect kind of bridging fight to the mainstream where it's you turn on Netflix, it's going to be there for everyone to see? Do you think this is that perfect fight?
I really hope so. I really hope so. It's funny because Canelo in certain parts of the world, in yeah, North America, but particularly obviously Central America, South America is a massive, massive star. Crawford isn't as big a star as he probably should be in world sport. So it's you couldn't say it was trade, but you know what I mean. It's got that
Mm.
kind of slight aspect to it. Like they're not Fury, they're not Joshua, they're not Usyk, they're not those guys. But at the same time, I really hope it does, because the sport needs a shot in the arm in America. There's no question about that. Netflix getting involved in boxing is definitely a good thing.
Mm.
I wouldn't imagine they're going to want to do loads. So the next important thing, I think, is that a big hitter, whether it's ESPN, we know their deal with Top Ranks finished, but whether they might jump on with someone else or however it happens, or someone like that needs to get involved in the sport, and hopefully this can definitely help with that. You'd have thought.
Definitely. So, Andy, I will leave it there. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Hopefully, catch you at the next one if you're in Saudi. Hopefully, I'll see you there. But thank you again for your time. And yeah, looking forward to the next time, mate.
Thanks.
Cheers.